The Interesting Conversations with Interesting People podcast series with author Nigel Beckles.
Welcome to the podcast.
Please like the podcast and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. The very best way to promote your podcasts. Podpage makes it easy to create a podcast website with just a few clicks. Every page is optimized to be found on Google and it stays up to date forever. For more information, visit podpage.com. The future of podcast promotion.
Have you experienced several failed relationships or been through a divorce? How can you avoid making the same mistakes again? How to avoid making the big relationship mistakes is out now.
Hi, my name is Nigel Beckles. My book is packed with practical and common sense strategies that you can use to make better relationship choices.
Now you can discover the dangerous myths about love. If your relationship expectations are realistic, why you could be falling in love for all the wrong reasons.
How to avoid making the big relationship mistakes. It's a book that could change your life.
Available from amazon.co.uk. Kindle version also available.
Author Queen P. When the mood is right, a poetry journey, mood swings, and when the mood is right, a rebirth. Books available on Amazon and all good bookstores.
Hi, I'm Queen P. Please join me by tuning into my poetry podcast, The Royal Affair, on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Google, and all other similar platforms. You can also listen to the podcast on the Helium Radio Network on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You have entered into the Royal Affair.
Get ready for takeoff.
Welcome back to my Interesting Conversations with Interesting People podcast series. My guest for this episode is American author Danielle Patrice. Hi Danielle, welcome to my podcast series. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So where do you live at the moment?
I live in the United States in the state of New Jersey.
Okay. Well, I understand you attended Tennessee State University. Which qualifications did you obtain during your studies?
Well, I obtained a bachelor's degree in speech communications with a concentration in mass communication, which is really film, radio, TV.
Oh, that sounds very impressive. You recently had your first book published. What is your book called and what is it about?
My book is called Neuroscience, the Ecosystem of Domestic Violence. So the book is really a research book based upon my understanding of wanting to learn about domestic violence and the dynamic between victims and abusers. So it's a research that starts understanding between the impact of domestic violence from the brain, how our lives are shaped between domestic violence through different aspects of life from individuals, of interviews, and all the way from politics, entertainment, all the way to society.
So why were you motivated to write a book about abusive people and domestic abuse?
Well, I am a domestic violence survivor, and for a total of 9 years, I was in a domestic violence situation. And I was able to luckily get out of that situation and actually become more involved advocating and fighting for domestic violence survivors, victims, and victim defendants. And through this, while I've done a lot of emotional speaking, I understand a lot of people were met with sympathy or wanting to meet with me with sympathy. However, I wanted something that was more science, backed by science based, and that people can see like there's something going on here that can lead to some change.
Well, I will be publishing a book on domestic abuse and toxic personalities later this year myself. So what do you consider to be the link between science and abuse?
That's a great question. So I think there's a few things, and I want to start with the brain. And so a few things that I've discovered over doing the scientific literature reviews is that there's something in the brain called the limbic system, which is supposed to regulate the emotions in your brain. And part of that, there's the hippocampus, there's the amygdala, there's also the thalamus and so forth. But however, the amygdala is a very important part of this because it also deals with anger and deals with frustration and whatnot. And also I've read that there were different brain structures that also cause aggression, being that the amygdala in the ventromedial precortex, which is pretty much back here in the front portion of your brain, but it's a little further in, that it is also related to the moral decision of harming another person. So that's one aspect of it. There's also the cortisol, which is the hormone that is released. It's in connection with the chronic stress from having been in an abusive relationship with their partner. And I'll just say one last thing about that is from the physiological aspect, women who have left their abusers are basically having a functionality within their bodies their functionality profile of showing them being a decade older than how they really are because of the stress and everything that has embodied them from being in this stressful situation over time.
So what do you think are the top 3 characteristics of a typical abuser?
I think that one of the first things is understanding love bombing and how it affects you when someone's giving this admiration and just an enormous amount of it in a short little bit of time. Also, I wanted to kind of just a little briefly talk about the fact that there's also a lot of manipulation where it's a hot and cold type of demeanor where someone is definitely, you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know how they're coming towards you as far as emotionally. And that is to really kind of get you off your balance as a person and really trying to make sure like you're not onto them or you're caught off guard. And I would say another thing, a third thing is high minimizers. Someone that is just constantly minimizing what you're doing or minimizing whatever they have done. Basically, there's no accountability there. So that's one of the few things I would say to look into.
You sound to me as if you're describing a narcissist because those traits are very narcissistic.
And narcissists can be abusers.
Oh, I know this.
Yes. And not to mention, also like when I was reading some of these literature reviews, some of the things that I also came across was that talking about the dark triad, psychopathy, Machiavellism, and narcissism, that also talked about their preferences being wanting to have either one night stands or being friends with benefits, where they're more positively correlated with having short-term relationships as opposed to being in long-term relationships. So these type of traits, these people that have are definitely a severe case of domestic violence abusers, although there are sorts of multiple ways that it could be an abuser, whether it's through socioeconomic, through a nature versus nurture type of behavior, genetics, learned behavior. It's all different facets.
So what advice would you give to a person who is being abused in a relationship?
I would say to a person that is being abused that, one, it's not your fault and you're not alone, that you cannot save this person from themselves. You cannot help this person. There's something deeply disturbed with that person for them to inflict pain onto you. So if anything, the first thing you do is definitely make sure you keep a record, keep documentation that you can have in order to contact the police, contact your court system, your legal system, or what have you, to make sure you have some sort of protective or restraining orders that you can have, and make sure that you have a plan. Don't have to write your plan, but make sure you have a plan in case it gets very physical and you need to escape. And also make sure you have people that you can trust in your corner to get out of that situation. If you don't, then find an organization that does support victims and survivors. They can help you make a plan to move forward and get out of the situation.
So how can people contact you?
So I am on Instagram as Speak Danielle Patrice. I'm also on X, formerly Twitter, and that is author D Patrice. Couldn't get the same handle on both sites, but those are my handles.
Danielle in New Jersey, USA. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Please join me. Interesting conversations with interesting people, featuring interviews with award-winning authors, relationship and life coaches, therapists, and a wide variety of people with intriguing stories to share. Interesting conversations with interesting people.
Please follow author Nigel Beckles' podcasts on Amazon Audible, Spotify, and all major podcasting platforms. Thanks.